moving away from slogans and really focusing more on what is actually the skill set that is required. How do you broaden the engagement across the organization? That it's not just, oh, there's somebody in HQ who's looking after these topics. How do we really guide employees and future employees through that journey and make it very tangible for them in their day job?
Hello and welcome to the CSO Impact Podcast, where we talk to leaders in sustainability, chief sustainability officers, and experts in the ecosystem. We're discussing the way work can play an impact in a positive future, and a desirable future we're all working on. I'm your host, Harald Neithardt. I'm the curator and CEO of Future.io, and today I'm here with Karin Reiter, and she is the CSO with Adecco Group, also one of the authors in our book, Leadership for Sustainable Futures, which I'm really happy about. Hello, Karin. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
So you're not only you are special, but today is special because we're in this amazing location while the CSO Leadership Forum is starting tonight and tomorrow. So you have a special setting. Everybody else will be on Zoom. So I'm really happy not only to welcome you, but about this fantastic location. Karin, you have an interesting role because you work in a group which is, let's say, working in general with personal staffing, HR relationships, human resources. Now we also have HR, which is human rights, ticks also a box. So why don't we start and you introduce yourself, your role at Adecco Group, and let's start from there.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. I'm always excited to talk about these topics in a broader context, and particularly to bring a little bit of a focus on the people and the social side of things, which tends to still get a little bit forgotten with all the focus on climate. So the Adecco Group, maybe just to provide a little bit of context, we're one of the largest employers in the world. We're one of the largest talent solutions providers. So we place about 2 million people into jobs every single day.
2 million?
2 million with our joint ventures, temporary staffing. Yeah. We also place people into permanent employment. We do outsourcing, we do outplacement, so providing people that have lost their jobs with new opportunities. We do tech consulting. So really spanning the whole range of talent solutions. Yes.
And just to give another, so your headquarter is in
Zurich, Switzerland.
Yes. And you operate in how many countries?
We are in 60 countries.
Wow, okay. And your largest country?
Is France.
France, okay.
The second one is the US.
Yeah.
And then there's, we have a very large presence in Japan, Germany, the UK, Spain.
So from Asia, markets. America and Europe, and everything out of the little, let's say.
Except for the African continent, and maybe a little bit in the north. So we're in Morocco, Tunisia, but it's very much European, APAC, and North America focused.
Fantastic. When did you start with the company?
Well, I started about 20 years ago as an Adecco associate. So after university, I was also looking for a job and for temporary employment, and it was Adecco that placed me. And then I returned as a full-time employee. It's now 6 years ago, with being charged with leading the sustainability and ESG function of the group, really spanning everything from own operations to sustainable procurement, but then also the client engagement and solution side.
So you are, let's say, maybe in a peculiar situation. So I guess as a CSO, well, you don't have, let's say, big operations because everybody works so you don't have probably a lot about problems about water or energy because that is, let's say, easier to handle for the back office. But talent and personnel is one of the biggest, let's say, drivers also in other people's supply chain.
Exactly.
Maybe you can enlighten us a little bit about, let's say, your pain points in helping your customers. Yeah.
I mean, one of the biggest topics for us is, of course, the other HR. As you mentioned before, it's the human rights. Yes. So how we recruit, and then particularly the work environments that we place our candidates and associates into, over which we most of the time don't have control. So it requires a lot of engagement with our clients and previous understanding. It's then also one of the key topics and I think opportunities is around the access to employment. So how do we lower barriers to access to the labor market, particularly as it changes so fast, right? And particularly for underserved groups. So it's not just women in certain roles, but it's also refugees, it's people with a disability, it's mature workers. all people that either don't have access to the labor market or are at risk of falling out of it. So the second topic is then beyond access is how do we enable people to stay in their labor market? If you think AI, if you think climate change, and that's where we probably see one of the biggest gaps for our clients is the lack of connection between their climate strategies or sustainability strategies with their human capital strategies. So it's how do companies ensure, many companies now have amazing climate strategies. They've set really ambitious targets, which we need, but then do they have an understanding of the skills that are required to meet these targets, to really transform their organizations? If they don't have them, how will they acquire them or up and reskill their existing workers? And what happens to workers that are at risk of falling out of their jobs because the jobs may no longer exist going forward? And I think that's where there is a huge opportunity to more closely collaborate across value chains. So for us, it's less water, it's less energy, but it's really around the green skills side. It's gotten more attention over the last few years. If you think COP, I think at the very beginning it wasn't really discussed, but now just transition, that topic is sort of gaining more and more traction, thankfully. But I think there's a lot more that we need to do, to have the skills in order to make it happen. It's not just the technologies, but there's somebody who needs to actually invent the technologies and implement them. And then it's also how do we support people in the jobs that may no longer exist.
And when we know about or talk about upskilling, is this also something you do for your, let's say, for your staff, for your people?
We do it for our own people, but it's predominantly also for our clients and the associates that we place. So we up and reskill something over 800,000 people a year. And there's certainly sort of...
So the Adecco Group University Academy as a whole program.
We do have it at different levels, right? In different skill sets. So, you hear a lot about green skills, but I think there's then also questions, what does it actually mean? Is somebody who, works in recycling, is that a green skill or other capabilities? And I think that's where we need to do a lot more. So moving away from slogans and really focusing more on what is actually the skill set that is required at every different level, right? It's not just about engineers,
of course,
but it starts...
it's every desk, and they can either decide I purchase recycling paper or normal paper. That's an easy, but maybe not even everybody thinks about, well, we ordered this paper like we always do, and little tweaks. And I think, in some experience or talking with some people, I think a lot of people don't necessarily feel empowered to just say, hey, wait a minute, why are we still using the normal paper? I'll just stick with the example. And just asking a question, the people say, somebody has a big plan, but how do we get into everybody's desk with everybody, let's say, switches on their brain for a second a day and say, okay, why don't we do this differently?
And I think that's probably one of the key challenges for chief sustainability officers or people working in sustainability. How do you broaden the engagement across the organization? That it's not just, there's somebody in HQ who's looking after these topics, but that people see it as a lens through which they look at their own jobs, right? I can do it in this way, or if I consider social or environmental considerations, what would it then look like? And considerations in the sense of risks and opportunities and impacts. But how do you get the knowledge out there? How do you make it truly, truly tangible, right? The paper question might be great for somebody in procurement, but not necessarily for somebody in HR who doesn't use paper anymore. So it's how do you make ESG sustainability truly, truly tangible for the day-to-day. So you need to have a tailored approach. I think it no longer cuts it if we just say, here's a training, do it, and it's very passively, but how do we really guide employees and future employees through that journey and make it very tangible for them in their day job?
And tangible means also almost bottom up. So don't wait for somebody giving you an order or a suggestion, but help us, bringing the knowledge also from, somebody in HR saying, hey, procurement probably didn't think about it. Why not? Asking questions.
But I think it's then also around, it's not just empowerment and bottom up, but you do need to provide certain guidance because I think often employees are also lost. We see it very much in the up and reskilling space. I think pretty much every employee nowadays knows that they need to learn sort of constantly, right? And they need to up and reskill themselves, but they don't know in which direction. So I do think there's a responsibility for employers to be more specific about where are the gaps what are the opportunities, which directions are available, and what career progressions are there to really enable that long-term or lifelong employability of people. I mean, that's something that we saw in recent studies that we did with thousands of workers. It's they want to, right? They know that there is a risk that they might lose their jobs if they don't. They're also eager, but they don't know in which direction. So I think that's then where we need to make a lot more knowledge available. What are the jobs of the future? How do you get there? What is required? And that's where we've launched a very big partnership with Microsoft last year, particularly to address that topic. How do we provide more transparency in career journeys, right? Not just accessible for your white collar workers on LinkedIn or so, where you have a lot more information at your fingertips, but also for non-office based workers that are often sort of more at risk of falling out of the labor market.
And would that be, let's say, an app, or is this sort of an email
It's an app where you can also check your skills. We're about to trial that.
Okay, and then if you don't have a skill here, watch this video or get trained or
I mean, it's more sort of to say which direction do you think, or it's sort of where you sort of enter your interests, your skill set that you think, and then it's sort of guiding through sort of with chatbot, with Gen AI, sort of having access to all this information at your fingertips that then guides you through it. And by that, not just helps you secure the next job, but hopefully then also increases your earning potential over the long time, right?
Great. So you have such a great, let's say, grasp of the knowledge, and as in your role, how do you see the role of the CSO evolve over the next couple of years? I mean, we have 2030 as sort of a day, so maybe let's, or a target date. Let's look at maybe the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
I'm going to give you a very lawyerly response. It depends. I think it depends on the maturity of the organization, where you are in the journey. I think if you're just starting out, I think the biggest part at the moment is ensuring compliance with all the legislation that is being thrown at us. It also depends on the industry that you're in, whether you're more regulated or not. And then if you're further on that journey, I think the role becomes more and more strategic, truly with a seat at the table when decisions are being made. I think in the past, and I've been in this space for 15 years, so I've really sort of seen it evolve from something that sits on the side very much to being much more integral and more strategic, particularly in organizations. If you think infrastructure, if you think cement, if you think transportation or so, where you need to have a huge lead time to order new trains, to have the whole infrastructure in place, right? So it's becoming much more strategic and not just trying to then change the way things have all been done all the time, but before something is being implemented, sort of move it in the right direction. So I think it's more strategic, higher level, and less focused on sort of the day-to-day implementation, because that should really sit with the respective functions and parts of the organization if you really take an embedded approach.
And would you say you are close to that strategic role?
I span everything still. I mean, I think it has become much more strategic over the last 6 years. I truly have to say, in terms of engagement with board, in terms of engagement with the different business units, it's no longer just a push from my side, but there's clearly a pull, because of course there's a lot of requirements from our clients coming, not just in terms of wanting to understand what we are doing on these topics as their supplier, and how are we managing the risks that they see in their supply chain, driven particularly by the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive in the EU or the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. But they're also looking to us more around how do we collaborate on some of the bigger challenges, particularly in the talent space. If you think D&I, if you think how do we bring more underserved populations into the labor market, because they've all set their own objectives and ambitions around these topics. They're looking for the right skills. So I think it's both. It's the risk management side, but it's increasingly the opportunity side as well. Now, and that's what's really exciting, right? If you're moving away from compliance truly to the impact side of things.
And that's what Sandrine Dixon de Clève, the co-president of the Club of Rome, she said, well, the next CEO should be the CSO, or the CSO with a strategic role might as well be the next CEO, because she is now involved in, let's say, all of the sustainability things, plus all of the strategy. So she might as well move up. I think at H&M
was the one, right? Exactly, so yes.
The first one is out of the gate, so that's a good example.
It's not going to be me.
We always want to be a role model, but it's good to see this. So you mentioned already you're, let's say, working with your clients. For them, for a lot of them, you are their supplier. So the question is sort of what is one of the biggest challenges in your job function right now or for yourself? So maybe that is something you can give.
I think on a personal side, let's start with that. I think it's more how do you continuously find the motivation and the energy and build that resilience, right?
Yes.
Because it's, even though sustainability, ESG, whatever you want to call it these days, has moved a lot more into the mainstream, I think there's still a lack of truly holistic understanding. I think if push comes to shove, we're still sort of push the financial considerations into the foreground because we are not yet often really truly able to quantify from a financial perspective some of the other impacts. I think there's a lot of work being done in that space, but there needs to be more. So it's still, how do you continuously build the capabilities of others beyond? And then you read all the newspapers, you're constantly faced with the depravity of humanity to some extent, right? It's what human beings are willing to do to each other just for 10 cents more on the dollar.
Exactly.
But then how do you hold sort of that long-term vision of change in your mind and sort of really push the organization forward? I think that's why the engagement with other CSOs, with other like-minded people is so critical to continue to motivate each other and sort of to put that bright light out there. Right. From an organizational perspective or CSO perspective, I think one of the big challenges is that we don't lose sight of what we are doing and why we're doing it. I think with all the legislation, as much as I'm a fan of it as a lawyer, I love laws, and I think it's truly necessary to ensure more accountability of organizations. I fear at the moment, the way that I see it being implemented is that it just creates a lot of tick-the-box exercises. It absorbs a lot of capacity to comply without truly changing realities on the ground. I get inundated with requests from clients around supplier due diligence. And yes, some of those we can now answer with Gen AI, right? That's where it's truly helpful. But in many others, we can't. So it absorbs capacity from the team because it just asks, do you have a policy? Tick yes. Do you have this? Tick yes. But it doesn't go deeper into how is it being implemented? What has changed on the ground because of it? And I think that's where we now need to find the right balance from the pendulum was over here, no legislation. Now it's over here, lots of legislation, that we find the right balance between meaningful, targeted legislation that truly drives change versus it still needs to be impact focused.
So let's say for the short term, meaning the next 1 or 2 years, are you optimistic, let's say, or how do you see maybe the next 1 or 2 years versus maybe the next 8 years? Because a lot of companies have until 2030, we have all of this amazing. But do you see them, others, let's say, truly on a journey, or say, if it's 2030, call me back 28 because then we still have enough time?
I think
are you optimistic, or how do you...
I have to be optimistic, right? If we aren't, then
exactly.
Who is? I think if you wait until 28, you're really going to have a problem, just because of it. Looking at the sheer size of organizations, right? And I think that's what many people, and particularly also regulators and legislators, often underestimate the sheer size of organizations. I mean, we have, depending on how you count, between 50,000, 150,000 own employees. We operate through 5,000 branch offices. Just to get information from the top into every single country, be mindful of local context, cultural nuances, and all of that is very, very complex. To also ensure that you have the right metrics, that branch office A over here understands the same when measuring something than over here. If we have a perfect example with the upskilling and reskilling, right? Does a branch office over here count the same thing as the branch office over here? And just to get that alignment right just requires a lot of time. So I think the next 2-3 years will still be very much absorbed by putting the right platforms in place, the right tools, definitions, understandings, and everything, while at the same time continuing to push to move towards impact. Because what we want to avoid is that we're just focusing on that without already having the view towards what is truly necessary to shift the needle. So we'll need to work hand in hand with a lot of different people to make that happen across the value chain and across industries as well.
Because you say people, I just wanted exactly to say this, you can have information and knowledge, but there's still people. So if there's in one office, there's a human, there's a manager and there's an executive somehow, and there's their own agenda. Plus, an information in an email doesn't necessarily make a behavioral change because you got to get it into their muscle and not just only in their brain. It has to be somehow resonating in their purpose. So it's going to be a hard one, right?
I mean, in the end, it's culture change, right? I think we've become a little bit distracted with all the terminology and the political things around it, rather than seeing sustainability is nothing but holistic risk and opportunity management. It's just that you broaden the lens as to what is a risk and what is an opportunity, what are impacts, and we're taking a completely different time frame, right? And that's what makes it challenging. But in the end, it's about good business, because in the end, it all drives financial performance.
Speaking about that,
I often joke that sustainability people are probably the biggest capitalists in the room, because we want to ensure that the company is still around in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Exactly.
It's just we're trying to go about it in a slightly different way and not just prioritize the needs of the shareholders, but being mindful of all the others. But in the end, it benefits shareholders as well. It's just maybe not every shareholder, but particularly the longer
stakeholder
term.
engagement versus only shareholders. I wanted to ask you about exactly this thing. So, good one that you might be the capitalist. So the driver for change. I mean, you spoke about COP. So there's a lot of over government organizations which are the slowest probably. Now we have technology. You mentioned also AI, which is changing every day, every second, something new. I mean, today, I think tonight somewhere in the podcast, but on the May 13th, I think OpenAI is announcing something new. So every day there's something new in this area. Who do you think is in the end a bigger driver of change? Because we have governance, we have technology, we have the needs for, let's say, the policy making from the US, but from the EU, but we also have the financial markets, which say, well, if you don't have this, I was at the meeting at Glasgow COP already a couple of years ago, and with the CEO of Deutsche Bank, and he said, we go all into the ESGs, because if we're not, we might be out of business in the next 3 or 4 years, which is about now, because I think that was 2021, Glasgow. So how do you think, who from the financial markets, government, COP, and technology, and all the other drivers, what is maybe the one who is actually prevailing?
It's a mixture. I think you need all of them. I don't think it's just one. It would depend. I think regulators could be, if we see how fast, particularly in the EU, they've been moving on some of the topics, if they would put in place a carbon tax, something like that, I think then suddenly things are moving really, really fast. But it depends on the topic on the hand and how willing are they then also to move it, and how far do they move away from personal power considerations to truly what's in the best interest of society. I think financial markets, they've moved much faster, also to some extent driven by EU legislation, but we've then also seen some sort of taking a little bit of a step back a little bit, or just sort of being a little bit more cautious as to how far they push it. And I see it with our own investors, right? There is not one type of investor. I think that's what we need to be mindful of as well. There is not the shareholder. You have short-term shareholders, you have risk-based shareholders, you have the long-term shareholders, and their interests may not be aligned. So we see it when we have analyst scholars, so there's very few questions, if any, around sustainability, right? It's still very short-term focused, and I think that's one of the big challenges. I think companies, many of them, their survival is at stake, right? I mean, if you're in the fast-moving consumer goods industry and you no longer have access to the raw material, you're out of business. And I think so it's not just the banks, but it's, do we have access to cocoa? Do we have access to all the raw materials that we need? So I think companies are really waking up to that. What does it mean for their supply chains?
And then human people are part of supply chain, if you will.
To some extent. It needs to go hand in hand, right? If you think consumers, we often say, well, one small person can't really make a difference. But then if you think particularly in the EU, with so many of us having a voting power, I think particularly in Switzerland, right, we're very privileged. We vote on anything and everything. So a voice does count, because you send a signal to the top, whether a vote is lost with 30 to 70 or 51 to 49. It's also through your investments, but it's then also through your consumer choices to some extent. Of course, you can say whether I fly or not, does it make a difference? But if everybody flies, you send a signal to the airline industry to say, hey, you need more planes. We need more routes. And by that, you fuel sort of the demand. So I think in the end, it goes, exactly. So I think all the stakeholders need to play together and sort of push forward much more not just strategically, but much faster.
So I have two closing questions, and one is, let's say, about what are you hopeful for? Before we go to that, what keeps you up at night? So what is maybe one of the biggest challenges ahead of you in your daily job, or in what you think is maybe some of the things to tackle?
I think the speed at which things need to happen, that it doesn't keep me up at night, but it keeps me up during the day, right? I mean, that's sort of really what I give a lot of thought to. How can we move faster? Be more mindful of all the different things that are at stake, that if we move over here, we don't completely forget about somebody over here, and just the interlinkage and the complexity of some of the topics, right? I'm currently in the process of rethinking our whole governance structure for the organization, particularly around these topics. And the sheer complexity and all the topics that need to be covered, even if you prioritize, even if you have your materiality matrix in place, it's still, how do you truly ensure that the organization is moving in one direction, and that you're able to sort of steer that huge tanker just sort of in that right direction. And I think that's, for me, it's the speed and the complexity that I see as some of the big challenges.
Do you think, as a global group, that, I mean, obviously you have to be much more, let's say, compliant and all the policies in Europe, is it helping you also in positioning that if you are in Asia or in USA, that they say, we appreciate it? Or is, I mean, USA, I was there a couple of weeks ago, and it's like a 50-50 feeling. Some is, ESG, that was 2 years ago what BlackRock tried, that didn't go anywhere, so forget about it. And the other half is still, no, we know as a global brand, we have to do it. So there's sort of I would say 50, the poll will tell us also where it will go. So do you think as a European company, it helps you, or is it sort of doesn't matter in the US or in Asia?
It does help, because I think a lot of the organizations see themselves that they need to move in that direction, whether it's politically motivated or not. I think because it's, in the end, right, it is about long-term holistic risk and opportunity management. And I think that's what organizations come to realize much more, whether they're international or not. So it does help in showing your clients that you understand their challenges, that when they work with you, there are no human rights violations, you got environmental topics covered or so, and you are that partner. But I think that now is sort of table stakes, right? It's now more to say, okay, how can we support you as a client in solving some of these big challenges? And that's what I then get very excited about, when you truly move towards the impact side of things rather than just sort of the risk management side.
Here's a final question. I really enjoyed the interview already, and I have 3 more, but let's say, what are you hopeful for? I mean, you mentioned, collaboration with other CSOs, community and so on, but what are you hopeful for that, things are moving, where things are moving in the right direction, or where you can have impact in your role?
I think what I'm hopeful for is just by seeing how much more widespread the conversations are around these topics, right? It's no longer a niche conversation that is happening somewhere in a silo, or that I still need to talk about why we as a people organization maybe shouldn't focus on waste management, right? So I think it's sort of it's not just where conversations are happening, but also the level of conversations and the strategic nature of it. And not just within the large corporations, but I think also beyond, sort of in my circle of friends. It's sort of the level of conversation and understanding of that something needs to happen. That's what makes me hopeful, right? Because that's the push that we need.
I think that was a fantastic closing. If you want to know more about Karin's career and some of her insights, they're in an essay in this book, which is just launched with the Moorman Publishers. Thank you so much for your time in this lovely setting, very unique. And good luck for your road. Keep us posted on your journey. And
you'll read about it in the next book.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Karin.
Thank you.